Well, hello, everyone.
Hey!
It's good to see you all, even though we don't see you. Alex and I were just talking. We just took a little screenshot for YouTube. If you watch this on
Because
Facebook,
I actually walked into the office like with time to spare.
yeah, so we actually have been planning this podcast for about 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, whereas last week we planned it for about 2.5 seconds.
So brace yourself for some extremely high quality content.
Tell your friends, quick, run, dash.
Yeah, share it to everyone.
Such a thing has never been seen before.
If you watch this over on Facebook, you don't get to appreciate, at least not right off the bat, you don't get to appreciate our screenshots. Sometimes we do a little preview screenshot, and
Aaron's face is not sad at all.
We're supposed to be making sad faces because we're talking about sadness or grief or whatever you want to call it today. And my sad face, my lips are sad, and my eyes are like so focused on taking a photograph. But Alex's looks really...
I've got my sad eyes going there and stuff. One of the most embarrassing things, I don't know if you can share this kind of thing on the podcast, but one of the most embarrassing things that ever happened to me in college was one of my lecturers, my professors, said, "You have just really sad eyes," or you have like these eyes that are just so like, and then she said, and it makes you want to just, it makes you want to just take him home. And then she realized like the ambiguity of what she was saying and how, like, again, she's a professor and she was being just very sweet and realized that she shouldn't be saying what she's saying, and said, and give you a doggy basket. And it was this very weird moment. Everybody thought it was hilarious, but apparently I have sad eyes. Apparently I have these eyes that like have this like ambiguous sad feel to them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always thought I had happy eyes.
Yeah. I don't know if I agree. You're kind of a jolly fellow.
Maybe I can just go to a contemplative sad, but Aaron's face does not look sad at all.
not in our screenshot.
Deeply concentrated in our screenshot, like he's trying to take a screenshot. And so, but this week we do get to talk about sadness, which as Enneagram people is probably not natural to either of us. So not only did I not ask someone who was good at sadness to preach, but we didn't even invite someone who was good at sadness to this conversation.
No. Well, although because of the last couple of years of my life, I've experienced some emotions differently. So much so that I've questioned my Enneagram number being a 7.
Yeah.
And I keep wondering, like, am I actually a 7, or was that like a fake self that was like just trying to pretend like I was
which makes
happy?
Sense because, and again, some of you are Enneagram people out there. If you've never done it, it's worth looking into because it's one of those rare personality tests that it has some spirituality connected to it. It does help you in your relationship with God, I would suggest. And it is actually like at its best form. It doesn't just say, "Hey, isn't it great that you're you? Just keep being you," which is what I think a lot of personality tests can be. It's like, here are your strengths, here are your weaknesses, just live into your strengths and life will be great. And the Enneagram actually at its core does a lot more work of like, no, this is your great temptation or vice. You have to learn to be aware of this. And so that in itself is helpful, I think.
Totally.
And yet at the same time, I would say my belief as a 7 is that everybody really wants to be a 7. That they like long to be just the happy, jolly 7.
Yeah.
And that the rest of you all are just suffering and just,
I don't know. I admire a lot of other types a lot.
Yeah, well, I didn't say 7s want to be 7s, I guess. I just said everybody else. 7s just look like they're having so much fun all the time. Like, how can you not want to do that?
Fair enough.
No.
So a couple of weeks ago when we were streaming from Florida, I opened our session with like 3 or 4 confessions. One, that I wasn't drinking tea.
Yeah.
Would you like to
I would
tell
never
us
do
something?
that. I'm actually drinking hot chocolate.
Wow.
And it was partly because, so it was all Aaron's fault because he didn't have any milk left. And so I'd come to rely on him for this one thing. And
it's my fault that you've come to rely on me.
Yeah.
Wow.
I needed the milk and it wasn't there. So now I'm sat here drinking hot chocolate and a guys drinking tea podcast.
Well, I have a confession as well.
You're not drinking
This was
tea.
a little bit closer to home maybe for you. I didn't actually hear your sermon on Sunday.
Wow.
And so here's what's going on.
Wow.
We had our
sat
projectors.
through worship twice.
I know. You just are a kinder person than me. Our projectors kept failing on us on Sunday. And so I spent both services looking around at different equipment and trying to figure things. And then in between services, I was ripping apart our sound booth to try and get our projectors to work properly again. And then I went to now we've talked about this sermon before it happened, but I realized today when I sat down, I was like, normally I you said this, and then I loved this point and this thing. I don't have that for you today. Don't have that, I don't know if I loved it.
No, it's hard to love something that you didn't participate in.
So I'm kind of at the mercy. Like you can just run the show here.
Oh, wow.
Sadness. But in our 2 minutes of preparation for this podcast, you started talking about some interesting stuff. Well, I don't know if we should jump into that. Well, again, I'm trying to convince myself to do this stuff at the beginning-ish. This is the beginning-ish. One, I always tell people to like, subscribe, share, all that stuff, because it's all helpful with the digital world and stuff to get this content out there. So if you'd like to do that, great. If not, so that's fine too.
I love it.
The other piece is a little bit of an overview of where we headed today. So would you give us an overview of what are we talking about in today's show?
So, and again, we've been talking about emotions for a few weeks now, and just trying to wrestle with some of those things, like how we process some of those deep, especially the emotions. Some of the time we'd call bad emotions, but I think we're trying to get away from that language. We're trying to use the language more of like difficult, uncomfortable emotions, painful emotions. Trying to look at like where do they come from a little bit, but also like where do they send us? What do they move us into very quickly, and how might processing them a little bit better actually help us in our relationships with each other? That's always a win. Like I think for us at South, we believe part of the church's mission, goal, vision is to help people have better relationships with each other. But we also want to think about that bigger picture of a relationship with God. Like how do our relationships get in the way there? How does God speak into our emotions? So this coming week, in actual fact, like this Sunday, we're going to talk about fear, which is an interesting one, because how do you deal with an emotion where God says like 300 and something times, do not fear? That's a difficult one. But
maybe you feel shame about feeling fear.
Potentially, yeah. But this week, talking about sadness, how do you process an emotion that we see God have? Like God is the first person in the Bible to express sadness based around like the way that we talked about it this Sunday. He sees a world that is a mess and he is sad about it. Wow. Today we get to talk about that a little bit and really just try and process like, one, there's a whole bunch of us, all of us experience sadness. But there's a few of us that feel like we are sad people. And that's probably not either of us, although I think you started to tap into that just a little bit. Your journey over the last couple of years, I think you had moments where you probably questioned a little bit, wow, have I become a sad person?
Yeah.
Or have I always been perhaps a sad person?
Yeah. There was times there. Yeah, in after the fact, joked about it with some friends about like a 7 going through the dark night of the soul is just like an average day for some people. Like one of the darkest seasons of my life, and I was like, I'd say still a decent chunk of percentage of my day was filled with, I'm pretty good.
I'm pretty good. Yeah.
But no, there was months and months at a time where I was grieving over various different things, and I would wake up and just be deeply sad for months on end. And then it made me doubt. Interestingly, when you go through an extended season of that, call it depression, call it grief, whatever, however you define those things, which we could get into, but there's different ways that you could describe them. It starts to make you question your identity. For me, as someone who's typically laid back, happy-go-lucky, I became more cynical. I became harder to be around. Maybe I'm still harder to be around sometimes since then.
I think I actually would say, like, even for me, who's only known you for like a year and a half, I can see a shift. Like, and I think you've said like a couple of times, almost like there's almost a sense that I've never even met you as you were at one point, but I've seen a shift back in that direction. Even like taking some time away on sabbatical, getting some space to process and just reflect and enter into some practices. Like there's a little bit more of an ease. I think that I can see, even not having seen the amazing energy of like the whatever year that was, or But even like Aaron and I went snowboarding the other day. And like he's flying down these mountains with no helmet after not being snowboarding for like 12 years, and seeing just a little bit.
Don't tell my wife that.
Listen, darn it! I told my wife she's not allowed to listen, so I can
say whatever you want.
But you see like the like the happy-go-luckiness there almost of like, oh, it's gonna be fine. That's like the language of an Enneagram 7. It's gonna be fine. I like our words to live by. It'll figure itself out. What's the worst that can happen? So I think, I can say that I've seen a bit of that. I genuinely have not been through maybe just one period of sadness, maybe that I could locate. But for the most part, I just live for the most part in that fairly comfortable place of no, I'm mostly upbeat, and sadness is very much episodal as opposed to dispositional. It's a thing that happens, and I tend to process it quite quickly. Now, that's not to say there won't be things in my future that will lead me into the deep places of sadness. Oh, and I think you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, totally.
And recognize you're going to have to learn to deal with that. But I know there's definitely some people that will listen to this that would say, no, I'm regularly and often sad. And so the challenge there for me was, I think actually God calls us, and Jesus seems to do this really naturally and well, to hold sadness and gladness together. Like he seems to do that. He seems to be able to, like, even the weird phrase, like, for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. Joy and cross don't belong together. And Jesus somewhere there is embracing the gladness of living in God's purpose and the sadness of what he's experiencing. Mm-hmm. That maybe allows us, when we are glad, to sit with sad people. And when we are sad, to enter intentionally into gladness, to realize that's actually that's a responsibility of a follower of Jesus. It doesn't mean the sadness will go away. But 3 times Paul says, in like just a short space of writing to a church in Philippi, he says, rejoice. And this is a church that's experiencing like political upheaval, experiencing poverty, they're basically living our lives. And Paul's like, no, you will rejoice. That's your job and responsibility as a follower of Jesus.
So I've wrestled with this. And I tuned into the tail end of the message, obviously. I probably heard the last 10 minutes of both first and second service. And one of my questions then with that idea is, how do you make yourself feel joy? Do emotions work that way? Do you just to say, I am going to flip on the joy switch? Mm-hmm. The Bible tells me to be joyful, so flip on the joy switch. How does that actually work?
I think so. I would, my feeling would be, you can't make a feeling happen, but you can make a practice happen.
Did you make yourself feel that?
I don't know.
Sorry.
No, I think it was just organic.
My head's about to explode.
I'm down a rabbit hole. Help. Let me say this. I don't think it's useful to sit around trying to make a feeling happen, but we do know that there is ambiguity between feelings and emotions. Like which is which? Are they the same thing? Like when we think about love, like love is very much a choice practice. Is it an emotion? I don't know if it is. but I also don't know that it isn't like that like decision. Like I feel things for my wife, I feel things for my kids, and yet I also make a practical decision every day to love them, even when that's not a particularly easy thing. Even when my kids are acting the way that they act at times. And I noticed the distinction there between my girls, my oldest kids, and my son Jude. There's something about a father-daughter relationship that makes it easier to feel a lot of those things, I think. And certainly earlier on with Jude, it was more of a practice. No, you actually are rubbing me up the wrong way in a different way to the way that the girls ever did. I expect more of you than I ever expected of them. I see you and I see me in a way that I never did with the girls. So there was more disciplined love for Jude at an age that just wasn't there for the girls. For the girls, it felt so easy. And so I think even just that example tells us that there's a difference between just feeling joy and practicing joy. And that maybe feelings follow that, but there is still a responsibility to enter into the big story of God, which is inherently joyful.
That it makes me wonder if all of these emotions, both the good emotions, the painful, like the desirable emotions and the painful emotions, if it seems like week after week, as we've been having these conversations, it almost is like we're challenging people to engage this emotion with intention. You've talked about it several times throughout the series, to see it as information and data that informs how you're...
You gave me that quote, to be fair to you.
Which isn't mine either. But so to see it as this helpful thing, but in order to get something good out of both the pain and the joy, you have to sort of steward this emotion wisely.
Yeah.
And what you're saying now with love, with sadness is, or even the challenge to say, feel joy. It's some measure of intentionality to say, I don't even know how that works, but I'm going to try and lean in and figure out how it works.
Yeah.
It's all, everyone,
and it's hard to believe that when to go back to the language of feeling, that Jesus felt joyful about the cross. That's a hard thing to sort of...
Well, it said for the joy set before him.
Yeah.
Did it say he felt joy about the cross? Or did he say, for the joy set before him, like the promise of joy, he endured the cross?
And isn't that maybe what we're talking about when we talk about entering into sadness as well? Like it's a decision to believe that God will bring the story to the right place. And it may not make sense now, but it will make sense. I think that just like, and an illustration I would give around that is Laura and I had a child. She was pregnant and we lost the child. Now she definitely felt a greater sadness around that than I did. I mean, again, she's carrying the child. She's, she had like the flutterings of like this new thing growing within her, this person growing within her. She was
the motherly
going through
instincts,
the sickness, all those different things. And there's language that people would use that would say, maternal love is instinctual and paternal love is learnt behavior. But she definitely had this big emotion for it, this big sadness that went in with it. I had to enter into her sadness by choice and sit with her in that and not just rush through it. And we were actually traveling together. We actually had this one trip that we would take every year, and it happened right after we lost this child. And it was definitely a different trip to any of our other trips.
Yeah.
And so for me, some of that was this intentional joining in her sadness, which felt different to me. And yet both of us had to enter into the idea of joy that, a friend came up to me and said, isn't it incredible that you'll see that child in heaven? You'll engage with them and know who they are. And I didn't need the theological basis, but there was this sudden moment of like, wow, yeah, I'd not really thought about that. I get to enter into the future joy that God will bring even that story and bring like this goodness out of it. And so maybe that is what we're seeing with Jesus, and maybe that's what we're called to do as well. I certainly don't think I'm meant to suggest we have to feel good. But I do think that there is an idea that God will bring all stories to the right place. And that's an exciting thing.
Yeah, so I threw out this idea, one of the daily devotions. I was wrestling through how to write and stuff, and I wrote this line. I don't know how it ended. I honestly don't even remember which week it was or whatever, but it was just more of my processing of these different emotions as we've been going through the series. And it keeps coming back to mind, and maybe I'll ask you what you think of this idea. I feel like emotions are an invitation into something. Every emotion is actually an invitation into a journey of some sort. And you can either take the invitation, which is like, it's choosing to lean in, observe the emotion, figure out why it exists in your life, and then grow from it. And each one's a different kind of an invitation, but they're all these invitations that sort of swell up from within us to engage in super healthy ways, or to disengage and disassociate and in unhealthy ways in some way, shape, or form. I don't even know if that's true, but I sort of wrote it. I think it's true of whichever emotion I was writing it about. I'd have to go back and read my own devotionals.
Which, if it was last week, would maybe be anger, right? But maybe sadness.
Yeah. So, but what do you think of something like that? Like sadness as an invitation to something?
Well, certainly an invitation to make a choice somewhere, perhaps. We just started to wrestle with, and depending on how theological you are, you may want to go to this place or not. But the first emotion of sadness is God's emotion at seeing the world. And you could make this argument, it leads to violence, or it leads to God saying, I'm going to destroy the world and save one person and his family. And two, and
we're talking about the Noah's Ark.
Talking about the Noah story, which is a story that's present outside of the scriptures as well. And so some people would say this Genesis writer is taking this story and saying, no, this is what it really means. But you definitely see that sadness linked to anger, linked to destruction. And we don't even need to say whether the destruction is right or wrong, but I know so many people, so many followers of Jesus that have wrestled with that incident. I remember actually my dad saying to me something like when I was growing and starting to follow Jesus for myself, said one of his big wrestlings was, he said, like, if God did that, then in my mind that was evil. And I'm like, wow, like I'd never heard anyone express a tension of faith like that. It was my first encounter with that. And I remember waking up the next morning, like, did I dream that? Did that really happen? And then Jesus almost takes that, because, I think we have to believe that Jesus takes old stories and says, no, this is what God is really like. He takes things like an eye for an eye and he says, no, don't do that. That's such a bad idea. Which is again, like a hard hermeneutic in some ways. Jesus believes he has the authority to take Old Testament law and say, nope, don't do it like that.
Yeah, the Bible says this, but I disagree. You should do this instead.
Yeah.
Jesus does that all over the place. There's no, I've said this before, maybe on the show even, but it's no wonder that the religious leaders wanted to kill this guy. If he's not God, he was a big time blasphemer.
Yeah, and if he was just a man, it's like me saying,
exactly.
Oh, Jesus said this, but like, no.
Imagine
right.
Alex stands up on a Sunday morning, says, put away your Bible.
Yeah.
You've that Bible says this, but I disagree completely.
Yeah.
Let's say that's the equivalent of what Jesus
does. And
does.
then if I was to say, that Easter ceremony that we do, that service that we do, this year it's all about me. We're going to sing songs about how incredible I am. like it's, again, if he was just human, that's what he's doing. And yet, the most obvious explanation to me is that he's more than just a human, and that then it all makes sense. He takes that story or something similar. He stands looking over Jerusalem and he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets, I would love to gather you like a hen gathers his chicks, but you won't let me." And then he goes and dies for the people in that city. So we have this Old Testament story that sees anger or sadness lead to anger, lead to violence. And then this New Testament story that sees sadness lead to violence against the person who is sad for the people.
Now, if this is, I feel like we should pause briefly and maybe give a few frameworks. Like if this is one of the issues that you've wrestled with, or the whole idea of Noah's Ark or the Old Testament, and why is the God of the Old Testament different than the New? Like, I don't think we have time to get into all of the details of it. But what I will say is, I think that if those texts bother you, then they're working correctly.
Yeah,
I think they're supposed to.
Yeah.
I was, I've been listening to this this Christian rabbi, a Messianic Jew, teaching through the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Interesting. Yeah, there's a couple things. I don't get into all the details of it, but one of his big laments is that we have this tendency in evangelical world or in Christianity, if you've been around it long enough, that those things bothered us initially, and then maybe over time we didn't get the answers we wanted, or they scared us too much, and for various different reasons, we eventually just sort of start to just push down those concerns about those passages, and then say, no, it's fine. It's fine. God's in control. He's loving. Look at Jesus. You're like, don't look at that guy. Look at Jesus. And we have this tendency to just avoid those hard passages because we don't have explanations. And he said, if it seems like it doesn't match, if a text seems like it doesn't match the character of God, it's supposed to haunt you. It's supposed to make you dig and fight and wrestle and cry out to God and say, why? What was this? What was going on here? And we tend to take the easy way out and just avoid those passages or say, I'm not sure, and move on and stuff. This is actually, especially Hebrew literature, is designed to make you meditate, to make you wrestle for a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, and I'll give you a little hint at some of his wrestlings, his personal wrestlings with that particular story. There's actually a couple things going on. It doesn't take all of the challenge away, but the final image of the rainbow, it's not rainbow in Hebrew. It's bow and arrow. Like there is no Hebrew word for rainbow, according to him. He said it's just bow. And like over the years, we've interpreted it as a rainbow in the sky, and that may very well be the very thing that he used as an image. But the idea is it's a weapon that he places in the sky facing towards him. Because he says, never again, in the future, I take the hit.
Wow.
And then that's confirmed all throughout the Torah multiple times. Even like there's all these little allusions in the story of Noah and in the story of Moses leading the people of God over and over and over again, these moments where we kind of think that God's lashing out at the people, he's actually taking the hit for the people over and over and over again, which is completely consistent with the way of Jesus.
I think I used this as an illustration not long ago, but your sort of like reflection on Old versus New Testament, how we tend to create that division. It always reminds me of the Coen brothers' brilliant movie, Hail Caesar. They've got this moment where a rabbi and a Catholic priest and a Protestant minister are sitting around discussing, and one of them says, Jesus is God's son. And the rabbi says, no, God doesn't have a family. He's a bachelor, and he's very, very angry. And then the Protestant minister says, no. He used to be angry, but he isn't anymore. And like that simplistic divide just simply doesn't work.
No,
that just isn't a good way to read the scriptures that we've been given.
Yeah.
And yeah,
totally.
that running thread of God stepping in for his people, and expressing that longing, which is really a kind of sadness. So especially you see that in Hosea, I think, like you see that picture of a prophet who marries a prostitute and keeps taking her back even when she's unfaithful. And God says, that's what I'm like. Like, I'm going to keep doing that. And keep even finding new ways to do that. His sadness constantly finds ways to pull us back in. And I think one of the things that I think is helpful, like thinking through how emotions can be formational for us, how they can transform us and help us follow Jesus in new, better ways. I've got this sort of suspicion that I'll try and unpack a bit this week, that fear is the ground level emotion for almost all of our negative or all of our difficult emotions. Like I think most of the time when we see fear, when we experience fear, it leads to sadness or it leads to anger or it leads to some of these other things. I feel like when sad is the like ground level emotion, we have an opportunity to become as God would have us become in the world. God looks at a world and is sad. And then in Jesus asks the question, what can I do about that? And I think for us to look at a world and to be sad and say, what is God calling me to do about that? It is actually this incredibly formational practice. There's a repeated phrase, to experience transformation, you have to go to the dark places in the world, or to experience God, you have to go to the dark places in the world. Usually in the midst of the trauma that you see, you actually end up finding the God that feels like he's not there in that moment.
Yeah, because he hangs out with people who are hurting.
Yeah, so almost every time, every person that I've known that's done something incredible, I have a couple of friends that run anti-sex slavery charities where they're really doing their best to pull mostly girls, but boys as well, out of slavery, especially in the sex trade. And it starts off with this deep sadness that borders on anger, and then it leads to action.
Interesting. I think that tension, so you talked about it a couple times, even in this show, this tension of like, there's the sadness, but there's this invitation to joy. And what you're describing now is actually this journey between the two.
Yeah.
Because one of my favorite prayers, and we just went through a series recently through the Lord's Prayer, but one of my favorite sections of that Lord's Prayer is, Lord, let your kingdom come and your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. And that phrase is loaded with deep sadness and deep joy and hope for the future.
Yeah.
Because for me, when that prayer started to really function in my life as a spiritual practice was when I looked around me at the world that was broken and just grieved. Like, it's not supposed to be like this.
Yeah.
And like, I remember when this prayer really hit me, I was literally moved to tears and then the brokenness of the world, and then you say, Lord, let your kingdom come. And you see a picture of his kingdom, which is a place of shalom and peace, where love reigns, where hurt people are taken care of, where the widow and the orphan is cared for, all of these different things. And then so you have a prayer that's both marked by sadness. Lord, it's not supposed to be this way. But let your kingdom come. And I know it's coming. It's this tremendous sadness mixed with this beautiful joy,
we tend to turn that really quickly into like there's a place up there that reflects all of God's, and that can still be true. But for a person hearing Jesus, it's probably like this Isaiah 65 passage always comes to mind for me. Like when he paints a picture of a new heavens and a new earth, he says stuff like this, like, never again will it be an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. The one who dies at 100 will be thought a mere child. They will build houses and dwell in them. I mean, you grew up in an environment where people built houses that were taken from them. And like the almost the painting of the picture, no, that's not going to happen. anymore in this kingdom. And to this people, that would be a common idea. No, though they experienced regularly what it was to have invasion, to have land taken from them, property taken from them. Crops that don't fail is just another simple picture that he gives, like there will be enough to eat in this kingdom.
Yeah.
For these people, it probably went to very, very earthly ideas. And for us too, when we experience that sadness of this doesn't feel like how the world should be operating, that seems to be what God is doing when he sees the world of Genesis 6. And it seems to be what Jesus is doing when he weeps at the tomb of his friend and watches how it affects their family. And when he stands over Jerusalem and looks at it and says, no, all of them have that common thread of the sadness is, no, it shouldn't be like this. And when we take that and we move it to action, it seems like we are acting like God in the world.
So maybe that is the invitation to have joy. It's to it's to not ignore the sadness or the brokenness of the world, but it's to acknowledge that fully, and then also acknowledge that the God that we serve, the God that we follow, has answers and solutions that he's working out in the world.
Yeah.
That brings so much joy. Like you mean there's a hope and a future and something even in the midst of my sadness. It may not be upon me today. Or may not even feel like it's upon me, but that's the invitation to have joy.
And I think that, and what I probably did not particularly elegantly get across, but was trying to get across in that was, if you are dispositionally sad, your temptation is probably to go back to bed and put the blankets over your head and just say, I'm going to pretend like I can't deal with this world out there. This is a mess. And if you are dispositionally, maybe more like you or I, your temptation is to hide from the sadness in a completely different way. Totally. We just go out into the world and pretend that it's not there as well.
Yeah, we're everything is awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're very Lego people. Yeah. The invitation is to actually enter into it, regardless.
Yeah, and you can't feel either the joy as palpably if you haven't also entered into the sadness. So a couple of the notes, I feel like we'd be remiss not to mention a few things, because we didn't directly go into a ton of deep stuff on anxiety and depression, but I think it'd be important, like, first of all, the shame conversation we had a few weeks ago that Kevin preached on. I know that there's this weird mixture when it comes to depression, grief, and anxiety. Sometimes it's so intertwined with shame because you almost feel ashamed that you're feeling this thing. I know that's how I experience negative emotions because I'm normally such a happy-go-lucky kind of person. I felt embarrassed by and shameful by my negative emotions. And first of all, like, when we talk about this, we don't want you to experience that side of it. But then the other piece of it is what's the role of medication in this process? Do we condone that? And then are you less of a person if you are naturally inclined towards being more of a melancholy soul or struggle with anxiety? Let's address that.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy just to say no, right? And it can be true and easy, but not easy to get across.
Totally.
And we do shame, I think, so well in this country. And I mean in the negative sense, because it's not like an obvious shame culture. Like, there are obvious shame cultures all over the world. Like, again, historically in places like Japan, if you felt like if you missed the mark, there was ritual suicide, all of these different things tied into it. There was a culture that was very much on the surface one of shame and what happened and how you process that. We've become, I think, a shame culture in so many different ways. And I think a good picture of that is how we do or don't talk about sex in America. Like, we're embarrassed to talk about it in Christian circles. And yet there's this whole other shift outside of the church world where it's like, if you're not having sex with everybody you meet and just whoever you want, there's something wrong with you as well. Like the shame hitting that conversation from all sorts of directions, and our students and our young people are right in the vortex of that. They're in a church world when nobody will talk about it. And it's like, if you have those feelings, there's something wrong with you. And then from their friends outside of the thing, the church, they're like, no, you should have been doing this stuff ages ago. What's wrong with you? Yeah. It's shame, and it's like this secret undercurrent thing. So I think we constantly shame people about their emotions and their feelings. Yeah.
And then there's historically, especially, and I think that, by God's grace, this is less and less the case within the church, but historically there was a lot of shame around if you ended up having to take an antidepressant or something like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And now I think that that's less of an issue.
I think so.
But it's not, I don't necessarily think it's all the way gone for some folks.
I don't think so. I mean, that's one of the things that like Laura, I'm quite happy to say Laura and I have a marriage counselor that we spend time with. Now, quite often what I'll do is I'll caveat that for people. I don't think because of shame, I'll say something like, it's not that we feel like we're in a bad place. It's just that we would love to work hard to have the best marriage we possibly could. And we realize that there's good conversations that this person can lead us in. Yeah. Part of the reason I caveat it is to say to people, you don't have to be in a bad place to do this. There's nothing to feel shamed about. Mm-hmm. But again, like same with the antidepressants, soon as we heard people say at least 10, 15 years ago, I have a counselor that I'm going to, you're like, wait, are you guys thinking about getting divorced? Wait, are you thinking about committing suicide? Wait, are you like, there was an assumption that it was crisis, not formation.
Yeah. So, I mean, just on that front, I know I have friends, some of whom are continually on some sort of medication for antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication or depression, which is tends to be two different medications for those two things, which is a whole other conversation separating depression and anxiety, which we could get into maybe, but I don't know if we have time. When I was struggling over the last few years, I went through about 6 months where I was on I don't remember what it was. And I've seen some of the most beautiful transformations in certain people's lives when they finally get over the shame of that and actually engage in it. It's like they've lived in a certain space, and then they finally say, no, I need some help. They go see a doctor, they get some medication, and then it's like, it was almost like this one piece of the puzzle that was preventing them from fully engaging in the way of Jesus, the way that they longed to. And it was like, oh, that was a thing that was removed from them, and then they're running headlong into the future. And
at the same time, there's also no shame in getting to that point where you say, you know what? I'd like to not be on medication. So I'm going to look at we've got some really great friends that come to South, Nate and Lindsay. They're our chiropractors. They also do some great work with diet and all of those different things. So especially for Laura, they've been so helpful in saying, like, this is some of the stuff that you're eating and how it's affecting you.
Totally.
Make some of these shifts and your quality of life will go up. Again, like whatever you decide is the best journey in this area, there is no shame regardless. And part of the reason I think we have wholeness as a value on the wall is that we didn't want to be the church that said everything's just as simple as
believe more,
pray
say
more, this prayer, do this practice. Like, it's so much more complex than that.
So much more. And again, just to confirm that, that's what it turned out to me. And I don't want to be like advocate for this route, but I realized as a 7, avoidance of pain is a high motivator for me. And so I went into a dark season, and I think that the medication helped me initially break out of some pretty significant anger that I was experiencing as a side effect of that dark season. And it sort of like took off that edge for me. But then as I was meeting with some mentors and going through some process of like trying to explore where's the sadness and grief coming from, I realized this medication is preventing me from actually exploring the dark place.
Yeah.
And because it just made me feel almost nothing. So I made a calculated risk, which was to go off of it, not so that I could intentionally not avoid the pain. And man, I wept a lot during those, after it sort of works its way out of your system, which takes multiple weeks.
Yeah.
But I was in a place on sabbatical and willing and had the time to actually go deep and dark and feel all the feels. And I'm glad I did. I'm not recommending that. That may not be the journey for you. Some of my friends, again, they live with it their whole lives, and they're like, I have no intention of ever going off because it actually helps me in my journey with Jesus.
Yeah.
For me, at that time, it would have been another avoidance of the real issues going on deep down.
And that comes back to the shame question again of like, regardless of your place in the journey. And this is true. Like, what I don't see particularly from Jesus at all is even when the thing is sin, and with these things, we're not talking about sin, we're talking about choice.
Yeah.
Even when it's sin, shame is not how he deals with it.
Totally.
And we so often deal with it. So I get to talk to like numerous couples that like are experiencing different stages of life. But one of the things that I think we do is like, especially I tell you where we do this a lot with couples that are not yet married, that they've come to know Jesus, that they're living together. And we're like, we see them like this. We see them as somewhat separated, and we're like, God is mad at you, 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 mad at you. And then you come together and you do a ceremony, and now God's happy. And that just isn't the picture that Jesus creates. Jesus' language is constantly, I have more for you. I have more for you.
It's an invitation.
I have more for you. There's an invitation in, I have more for you. There's never shame involved.
Yeah. There's a more beautiful way. Like, why don't you go on this journey? Like, imagine what it could look like if you stepped into this journey. It's always invitational.
And so I'm super excited for this last week on fear, just to wrestle with some of those questions there, because to me, like when I look at how I operate a lot of the time in lots of ways, like fear is an easy journey.
Would you say fear is a liar?
I'd say fear is a liar, and we should sing that song and sing it loudly, because it is a liar. Most of the time, I can hold multiple fears, and none of them, they're never compatible. They can't all happen at the same time. Like, and I'll have a process where I say, but what if this happens, and what if this happens, and what if this happens? And in the end, I have to look at it and say, one of them might happen, but they can't all happen. Like, that's just not possible. And again, like, hopefully just this would be the last week I do on emotions. You're going to wrap it up, which I'm super excited for, but hopefully just give us this sense of so many of these things are tied together. And God, the message of the New Testament is constantly take a step towards Jesus. He longs for you to be whole, which is a good message.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to offer people before we sign off?
I can't think of a single thing. I feel like we talked around that subject and it was good.
Pretty thoroughly.
I think we touched, I think I touched again. I would say for some people, if this is a repeated pattern that you see in yourself, actually, we love sitting down with people. I love doing pastoral counseling. I never say no to meeting with someone once. But usually then the conversation goes one of different places just because of what my time looks like and what my gifts are. Usually it leads to, there's probably a group to join or a class to be part of, or a professional counselor that we'd love to connect you with. And we have some people in the church that are willing to do some of that. Like if money is a stress, they're willing to think about doing that for a rate that they can work around.
Yeah.
And some of them will even do some like work for us that is free because it is just so important. And so just like the medication conversation, maybe there's a season for you to say, no, I'm going to actually unpack some of these things because I've been working through this emotion for a long time. Yeah.
So what if, like, let me just ask this hypothetical question and let this haunt you. If you're going through a season of particular sadness now, or if you tend to just live there your whole life, what if that sadness is an invitation from God on a journey? And what if that journey could start now? It could have, along the journey, you may meet a counselor. You may change your diet. You may go to a chiropractor. It could be like, maybe you need more sunlight. I know that my wife, like one of the reasons why we love Colorado is like both of us operate better when we get a little bit of sunlight, you know, and all of those things. But what if it's an invitation to a journey? Because I think the destination of that journey could be a human being who is deeply familiar with the sorrows of life and therefore able to guide others and able to enjoy the beauties of life at a different level than someone else.
Sometimes it just takes like the right thing. Like and again, this is the story that I think we can end on. I had this moment. I've played golf since I was 9. And I've had different seasons where I've played lots and seasons where I've practiced hard, seasons where I practiced and got worse, seasons where I practiced and got better, seasons where I didn't play at all and then felt like I would play pretty well, but always some frustrations with like physical limitations. And then I went and played a few games with people that I played with regularly over the years. And multiple times people were like, dude, like, what did you do? Like your swing is just, you're like a different animal out there. You're just like, there's like a release and a fluidity to your game that I've just never seen from you before. It's literally like I'm watching a different person play this sport. And actually, like, not to shout out chiropractors twice, but that was the key for me in that respect. Like just the way that they changed where my hips were aligned, suddenly it allowed me this release and I was hitting the ball further. My swing was better. It was effortless.
You mean I could play disc golf better?
You could theoretically play disc golf better. And it was just, to me, it was this microcosm of how something can unlock a key for you that helps you just live in a different and better way.
Yeah. So don't let the emotions just haunt you. Let them be an invitation.
Keep working with those things.
I love it.
We got to go. I love it too.
Probably. You know, last week we had all these comments. We interacted with people.
Because it's sadness. No one wants to talk to us about sadness.
Why doesn't anyone want to talk to us about sadness? No questions. Maybe I just need to refresh the page and see what's happening. There's like 35 questions, and I just didn't refresh the window properly. It just makes me, questions. I just have all these doubts and fears and anxiety and sadness that no one's paying attention. I'm just joking. All right.